The notification lit up the dark mahogany of the kitchen island, slicing through the silence of a marriage that had been dying for years. It was a text designed to draw blood, a calculated strike to shatter his composure and force a scream, a fight, anything. But as Julian read the words, he didn't feel the rage she expected. He felt the cold, metallic click of a lock finally turning. If you are drawn to the quiet catastrophes of modern love, where the loudest breaks happen in total silence, stay with me. There are no heroes here, only people trying to survive the wreckage they created. If you want to see what lies behind the perfect facade, don't look away. The rain in Chicago didn't wash things clean. It just made the city look like it was sweating. From the 42nd floor, the streaks of water on the floor-to-ceiling glass blurred the city lights into smears of amber and steel gray. Julian Vance stood at the kitchen island, a slab of imported Italian marble that was cold enough to numb his forearms. He was chopping bell peppers, precise, rhythmic cuts. Chop, chop, chop. The sound was the only thing anchoring him to the room. The apartment was a masterpiece of modern design, minimalist, expensive, and suffocatingly quiet. It was a space designed for a magazine, not for a life. His phone, resting face up near the spice rack, buzzed, a single short vibration that echoed against the stone. Julian paused, the knife hovering millimeters above the cutting board. It was 10:15 p.m. Elena wasn't home. She had said she was going for drinks with the girls, a term that had become increasingly loose in the last 6 months. He wiped his hands on a linen towel and picked up the device. The screen illuminated his face, casting deep shadows in the hollows of his cheeks. Sender. Elena. I'm not coming home. I'm staying at Marcus's place tonight. Don't wait up. Julian stared at the pixels. Marcus. The name was a ghost that had been haunting their hallways for years. The brooding artist. The ex-boyfriend who understood her soul in a way Julian, with his blueprints and structured logic, supposedly never could. For a moment, Julian felt a physical thud in his chest, like a heavy book dropped on a wooden floor. But it wasn't adrenaline. It wasn't the hot, blinding spike of jealousy that Elena was undoubtedly picturing as she typed those words. She wanted him to throw the phone. She wanted him to call her, screaming, demanding she come home, threatening to tear Marcus apart. She wanted the validation of his rage. Julian set the phone back down. He looked at the half-chopped pepper. He thought about the last year, the arguments that looped like a broken record, her accusations of his indifference, his exhaustion from trying to stabilize a woman who seemed addicted to emotional vertigo. He thought about the empty side of the bed that had felt miles wide even when she was sleeping in it. The text wasn't a confession. It was a dare. It was an ultimatum wrapped in betrayal. If you don't fight for me right now, the text implied, you lose me. Julian picked up the phone again. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. He could feel the weight of 10 years of marriage hanging in the balance. If he called, the cycle would restart. The screaming, the making up, the temporary peace, and then the next test. He exhaled, a long, steady breath that fogged the air in front of him. He realized with a terrifying sense of calm that he didn't want to fight. He didn't want to win. He just wanted the noise to stop. He typed his reply. He didn't use emojis. He didn't use punctuation to soften the blow. Sent. I understand. I'll have your things packed and left with the doorman by morning. We can email about the rest. He pressed send. He placed the phone face down on the marble. He didn't block her number, but he did switch the device to Do Not Disturb. Almost instantly, the phone began to vibrate against the counter. A long, sustained buzz. A call. He ignored it. Another buzz. A text. "Julian?" Another buzz. "Pick up." Another. "Stop it. I'm joking. Pick up the phone." Julian turned his back on the glowing device. The panic on the other end of the line was palpable. A frantic energy trying to claw its way back into his life. But the lock had been turned. He picked up the knife and resumed chopping. Chop, chop, chop. The rhythm was perfect again. Elena sat in a velvet booth at The Alchemist, a cocktail bar in the West Loop, where the lighting was low enough to hide flaws, but bright enough to catch the sparkle of diamond jewelry. She was alone. There was no Marcus. There hadn't been a Marcus in months, not really. Just a few stray text messages she kept on her phone like emotional ammunition, waiting for a war she was desperate to start. She swirled the melting ice in her untouched gin and tonic. It had been 12 minutes since she sent the text. 12 minutes. In her head, she had scripted the next scene perfectly. Julian would call immediately. His voice would be tight, maybe even cracking. He would demand to know where she was. He would drive over, storming past the bouncer, proving that beneath his tailored suits and suffocating rationality, he possessed a pulse. She needed him to be messy. She needed him to be irrational. The phone buzzed against the polished wood of the table. Elena's heart jumped, a triumphant flutter in her throat. She picked it up, ready to feign indifference, ready to let it ring 3 times before answering. But the screen didn't show an incoming call. It showed a single text notification. "Julian, I understand. I'll have your things packed and left with the doorman by morning. We can email about the rest." The noise of the bar, the clinking glass, the low bass of the ambient music, the laughter of the couple at the next table, seemed to vanish, sucked into a vacuum of sudden, ringing silence. Elena read the message again, and then a third time. Understand. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an accusation. It was a receipt. He had processed her betrayal like a contractor accepting a resignation letter. Her fingers trembled as she tapped the call button. It rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then voicemail. His automated voice, professional and detached, told her to leave a message. "Julian, pick up," she whispered, her voice tight. She typed a frantic follow-up. "Stop it. I'm joking. Pick up the phone." The message delivered. No read receipt, no typing bubble, just the static glare of the screen. She stood up so abruptly that her knees knocked against the table, spilling the gin. The cold liquid soaked into the hem of her dress, but she didn't care. She threw a $20 bill onto the table and pushed her way through the crowd. The air in the bar felt thin, insufficient to fill her lungs. Outside, the Chicago wind whipped her hair across her face, stinging her eyes. She fumbled with her rideshare app, her thumb slipping on the wet screen. 4 minutes away. "Come on," she hissed at the little car icon on the map. When the car finally arrived, she slid into the back seat, bringing the smell of rain and expensive perfume with her. "Lakeshore Drive, please, hurry!" The drive was a blur of neon lights smearing against the wet glass. Elena stared out at the city she usually loved, but tonight it looked hostile. Every minute of silence from Julian felt like a brick being laid in a wall she might never be able to climb over. She checked her phone every 30 seconds. Nothing. "He's bluffing," she told herself. "He has to be. He's just hurting. He wants to scare me back." But Julian didn't bluff. Julian didn't play games. That was the problem. That was why she had started this fire in the first place. Because the structure of their life was so fireproof it felt dead. The elevator ride up to the penthouse felt interminable. As the numbers climbed, 38, 39, 40, her stomach twisted. She prepared her opening line. She would laugh it off. She would call him ridiculous for taking her seriously. She would kiss him, and he would smell the gin and the rain, and he would realize he almost lost her. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. The hallway was dark. Usually Julian left the console lamp on for her. Tonight, it was off. She unlocked the front door and pushed it open. "Julian?" Her voice echoed in the cavernous living room. The floor-to-ceiling windows were dark, the city view a cold tapestry behind them. The kitchen was spotless. The only sign of life was the faint scent of freshly cut peppers lingering in the air. She walked into the living room, her heels clicking loudly on the hardwood. "Julian, this isn't funny." She reached the bedroom door and pushed it open. The master bedroom was pristine. The bed was made, the duvet pulled taut, unwrinkled, and then she saw it. On the foot of the bed, her overnight bag, the leather weekender she used for business trips, was sitting there. It wasn't full, but it was open. A neat stack of her clothes was folded beside it. He had started packing. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. He hadn't thrown things. He hadn't shredded them. He had folded them. She turned and saw the light spilling from under the guest room door down the hall. It was a thin, yellow line, as sharp and decisive as a laser. She took a step toward it, then stopped. The silence coming from that room was heavier than any scream she had ever heard. He was in there, and for the first time in 10 years, the door was locked against her. The morning light in the penthouse was unforgiving. It flooded through the east-facing windows, bleaching the color out of the furniture and exposing dust motes dancing in the air, tiny chaotic particles suspended in stillness. Elena woke up in the master bedroom. She had slept fitfully, curling herself into the very center of the king-sized mattress, subconsciously trying to occupy the space Julian had vacated. Her hand reached out instinctively to the left, but the sheets there were cold, smooth, untouched. She lay there for a moment, listening. She expected the heavy silence of a grudge, the kind where you can hear a person breathing aggressively in the next room. Instead, she heard the hum of the espresso machine, the grinder whirring to life, the sharp clack of a ceramic cup placed on a saucer. Normal sounds. Terrifyingly normal. She pulled on her silk robe, checking her reflection in the vanity mirror. Her eyes were puffy, her mascara smudged from the tears she had refused to shed until the lights went out. She wiped them aggressively. "Fix it," she told herself. "Just go out there and fix it." When she walked into the kitchen, Julian was already dressed. He wore a charcoal suit, the tie knotted with his usual architectural precision. He was standing by the island, reading news on his tablet, a cup of black coffee steaming near his right hand. He didn't look up when she entered. "Julian," she said. Her voice was raspy. He swiped a page on the screen. "Good morning. There's coffee in the pot if you want it." His tone was pleasant, mild. It was the voice he used for the building's concierge or a junior associate. Elena walked to the island, gripping the edge of the marble. "Did you sleep in the guest room?" "I did," he said, finally glancing up. His eyes were clear. There were no dark circles, no redness. He looked rested. "I thought it would be better for both of us." Better for us? Elena let out a short, incredulous laugh. Julian, stop it. I didn't stay at Marcus's. I came home. I was here 10 minutes after you sent that ridiculous text. Julian took a sip of his coffee. I know you came home, Elena. I heard you come in. Then why did you lock the door? Because the location of your body isn't really the point, is it? He set the cup down. He didn't slam it. He placed it. You sent the text. You made the decision to introduce that dynamic into our evening, whether you were actually in his bed, or just wishing you were, or just trying to hurt me. It yields the same result. It was a joke, she said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. A stupid, drunk joke. I was mad because you forgot the dinner reservation last week, and I wanted to get a rise out of you. That's all. Julian looked at her, and for a second, Elena saw a flash of something behind his eyes. Pity. It was worse than hate. I didn't forget the reservation, he said softly. I canceled it. I didn't think we had anything to celebrate. He tapped the screen of his tablet, closing the news app. I've emailed you a schedule. I'll be staying in the guest suite for the next few days while I look for a short-term rental. I've already spoken to the building management to ensure you have access to the service elevator if you want to move any larger items out, or if you want me to. You're talking like we're already divorced, Elena whispered. She felt untethered, as if gravity in the room had suddenly reversed. We are dealing with the logistics, Julian corrected. The emotional part. I think we finished that a long time ago. Last night just signed the paperwork. He checked his watch. A Patek Philippe she had bought him for their 5th anniversary. He looked at it as if it were just a tool to tell time, not a symbol of their history. I have a site visit in the West Loop at 9, he said. He picked up his briefcase. I won't be home for dinner. Don't wait up. He used her own words from the text against her, but without a trace of irony. He simply meant it. Elena stood frozen as he walked past her. She wanted to grab his arm, to shake him, to scream until that veneer of calm cracked and the real Julian, the one who used to look at her with desperate adoration, spilled out. But she couldn't move. His indifference had created a force field she couldn't breach. He opened the front door. Julian? She called out, her voice trembling. He paused, hand on the handle, but he didn't turn around. I love you, she said. It sounded like a question. I know, Julian said. That's why this is so difficult for you. Then he stepped out, and the door clicked shut. It was a soft, well-oiled sound, the sound of a vault closing. The office of Arthur Sterling was exactly the kind of environment Julian found soothing. It was on the 55th floor of a building Julian himself had consulted on a decade ago. The lines were clean, the lighting was recessed and unobtrusive, and the air smelled faintly of leather and old paper. It was a room where emotions came to be categorized, filed, and ultimately dismissed. Arthur, a man whose face was as creased and expensive-looking as his suit, slid a manila folder across the mahogany desk. Illinois is a no-fault state, Arthur said, his voice a low rumble. We don't need to prove adultery. We don't need the text message, Julian. We just need to state irreconcilable differences. Julian stared at us and the folder. Irreconcilable, he repeated. The word felt heavy, architectural, like a foundation that had been poured incorrectly and could never be leveled. Are you sure about this timeline? Arthur asked, tapping a gold pen against the desk. You only left the house this morning. Usually people wait for a cooling-off period, a week at a hotel, a counseling session. I don't need a cooling off period, Julian said. He looked past Arthur, out the window at the grid of Chicago streets below. The traffic moved in predictable patterns. Red lights, green lights, stop, go. I've been cooling off for 3 years. The memory hit him then, unbidden. It wasn't a big explosion. It wasn't the text from last night. It was a Tuesday, 6 months ago. Flashback. He had come home late, exhausted from a zoning hearing that had dragged on for 5 hours. He had walked through the door, craving silence. Instead, he found Elena sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by old photo albums. She had been crying, not soft, sad tears, but the angry, jagged kind she used to bait him. You didn't even notice, she had snapped before he could take off his coat. Notice what? He had asked, his muscles instantly tensing. I cut my hair, 3 inches, and you walked right past me. Elena, I just walked in the door. I haven't even turned the lights on. That's the point, she had screamed, standing up and throwing a photo album onto the sofa. You live in the dark. You treat this marriage like it's a waiting room for your real life. I am starving for you to look at me, and you look right through me. He had stood there, the zoning blueprints heavy in his hand, and he had felt it. The overwhelming urge to just stop speaking, to stop trying to fill the black hole of her insecurity. He realized then that no matter how much affection he poured in, it leaked out the bottom. She didn't want love. She wanted a reaction. She wanted friction to prove there was heat. End flashback. Julian? Arthur's voice pulled him back to the office. Julian blinked. The silence of the law office was a balm compared to the noise of that memory. The assets are complicated, Arthur warned. The penthouse, the investments, the art collection. She's going to fight for the collection. You know that. It's her identity. She can have the art, Julian said immediately. She can have the furniture. She can have the car. Arthur raised an eyebrow. You're giving up a lot of leverage. I'm buying peace, Julian corrected him. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his own pen. It was a heavy silver drafting pen. In my line of work, Arthur, sometimes you realize a structure is unsound. You don't try to patch the cracks. You don't paint over the water damage. You condemn it. You tear it down so you can build something that stands up. And Elena is the unsound structure? The dynamic is the structure, Julian said. Elena is just trapped inside it with me. I'm doing us both a favor by opening the exit. He opened the folder. The retainer agreement was on top. The language was dense, filled with here-and-afters and where-to-fores, but the meaning was simple. The end. He didn't hesitate. He didn't think about her laugh on their honeymoon in Como. He didn't think about the way she curled into him when she had the flu. He thought about the text message. Staying at my ex's place. The cruelty of it. The childishness. He signed his name. The signature was sharp, angular, unreadable. Start the paperwork, Julian said, capping his pen. I want her served by the end of the week. Professional courier, no scenes. Arthur nodded, pulling the file back. And if she calls? If she shows up here? She won't show up here, Julian said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. She doesn't like reality. She likes the drama of it. This office. This is too real for Elena. He walked out of the office, past the receptionist, and into the elevator. As the doors closed, sealing him in the quiet steel box, he checked his phone. 14 missed calls from Elena. 3 voicemails. He didn't listen to them. He watched the floor numbers count down, feeling lighter with every passing floor, as if he were shedding gravity itself. The limousine idled outside the gallery in River North, the engine purring with a vibration so subtle it was felt rather than heard. Inside the darkened cabin, the air was thick with the scent of leather and the unspoken agreement they had made 20 minutes ago in the elevator. Tonight, we are the Vances. Elena smoothed the silk of her emerald gown for the 10th time. Her hands were shaking. She looked across the seat at Julian. He was checking his phone, the blue light illuminating a face that was composed, handsome, and utterly closed off. He looked like a statue she might have curated for the exhibit inside, beautiful to look at, cold to the touch. "Do I look okay?" she asked. The question was a reflex, a habit from a decade of seeking his approval. Julian slid his phone into his tuxedo pocket. He looked at her, his gaze sweeping over the dress, the diamonds at her throat, the carefully pinned hair. It was an appraisal, not an admiration. "You look perfect, Elena. You always do." The compliment landed like a stone. It was objective, factual. It lacked the heat that used to make her blush. "The donors are expecting us to be happy," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Arthur Sterling said we shouldn't announce anything until the paperwork is finalized. So, tonight I am your husband," Julian interrupted calmly. "I know the script, Elena. I won't embarrass you." The driver opened the door, letting in the noise of the city and the blinding pop of camera flashes. The gallery opening was the event of the season, and the Vances were royalty here. As they stepped onto the sidewalk, Julian's hand found the small of her back. It was a familiar touch, one that had grounded her 1,000 times before. But tonight, it felt different. His fingers were stiff. There was no gentle pressure, no thumb tracing the curve of her spine. He was guiding her, not holding her. He was steering a ship. "Smile," he murmured, barely moving his lips. They moved through the crowd like a single entity. Elena beamed, laughing at the right moments, tilting her head to listen to a board member's dull story about his summer in Provence. Julian stood beside her, the perfect accessory. He nodded, he shook hands. He refilled her champagne glass before it was empty. To the room, he was the devoted partner supporting his brilliant wife. Only Elena could feel the distance. It was in the way he stepped back slightly whenever she leaned in. It was in the way his eyes never lingered on hers, always scanning the room, looking for the next exit, the next conversation, the next distraction. They stopped in front of the exhibit's centerpiece, a chaotic, violent canvas of red and black oils. "It's breathtaking, isn't it?" a voice said from behind them. Elena turned to see Clara, a rival curator who had been waiting for Elena to fail for years. Clara's eyes darted between Elena and Julian, hunting for cracks. "It is," Elena said, linking her arm through Julian's and squeezing his bicep. She needed him to squeeze back. She needed him to signal to Clara and to herself that they were a fortress. "Julian was just saying how much it reminds him of our first trip to Berlin." She looked up at him, pleading with her eyes. "Play along. Please." Julian looked at the painting, the chaos, the mess. "Actually," Julian said, his voice smooth and polite, "I was thinking that it looks like a structure collapsing under its own weight. Impressive energy, but unstable." Clara laughed, delighted by the critique. "Always the architect, Julian. practical over passionate. Passion is fine, Julian said, finally looking at Elena. His eyes were dark, unreadable mirrors. But without a foundation, it's just a disaster waiting to happen. Elena's smile froze. He wasn't talking about the art. He was talking to her, right in front of everyone, in a code only she could decrypt. He was telling her that her passion, her tests, her drama, her staying at my ex's text, had been the disaster. "Excuse me," Julian said to the group. "I'm going to get a sparkling water." He detached his arm from hers gently, but firmly. The physical loss of him was sudden, leaving her side cold. Elena watched him walk away toward the bar. He moved with a terrifying ease, navigating the room alone, looking more comfortable in his solitude than he had standing next to her. She stood there, surrounded by the art she had spent months collecting, the people she had spent years impressing, and she felt entirely naked. The armor of the power couple had protected her, but Julian had just taken it off and walked away, leaving her to hold the weight of the facade all by herself. The ride home was silent, but the apartment was deafening. As soon as the heavy oak door clicked shut, locking out the world, the tension that had been held together by champagne and social obligations snapped. Elena didn't wait to take off her coat. She turned on him in the foyer, her emerald dress rustling like dry leaves. "You humiliated me," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. It was trembling with the exhaustion of the performance. "You stood there and dissected our marriage in front of Clara like it was a crumbling building." Julian hung his tuxedo jacket in the closet. His movements were methodical. "I spoke about art, Elena. If you heard our marriage in it, perhaps that's your own conscience speaking." "Stop it!" Elena cried out. The sound tore through the quiet luxury of the penthouse. "Stop being so calm. Stop acting like you're fine." She ripped the diamond necklace from her throat and threw it onto the console table. It landed with a harsh clatter, $1 million of carbon treated like trash. "It was a lie, Julian." She finally screamed the words she had been holding back since Tuesday. "The text. It was a lie. I wasn't at Marcus's. I haven't seen Marcus in 6 months. I was sitting in a bar alone, drinking gin, waiting for you to call. I wanted you to be jealous. I wanted you to care enough to come get me." She stood there, chest heaving, tears finally spilling over her mascara-stained cheeks. She waited. She waited for the anger. She waited for him to call her crazy, to yell, to react to the absurdity of her gamble. Julian turned slowly. He leaned against the doorframe of the closet, looking at her. He didn't look angry. He looked incredibly weary, like a man who had been carrying a weight for miles and had finally been given permission to drop it. "I know," he said softly. Elena froze. You know?" "I knew the moment I read it," Julian said. "You've never been a good liar, Elena. And Marcus posted a photo from a gallery in Berlin 3 hours before you sent that text. I knew you weren't with him." "Then why?" Elena gasped, stepping closer, hope flickering wildly in her chest. "If you knew it was a lie, why did you leave? Why are you doing this? We can fix this if it was just a stupid game." Julian looked down at the floor, then back up at her. His eyes were dry, but they held a sadness so deep it frightened her. "That's the problem, Elena. I knew it was a lie. I knew you were testing me again. I knew you wanted me to panic." He paused, taking a breath that seemed to rattle in his chest. "But when I saw that text, when I read the words, 'I'm staying at my ex's place,' I didn't feel jealous. I didn't feel angry." He walked past her into the living room, loosening his tie. Elena followed him, terrified of what he was about to say. "What did you feel?" she whispered. Julian turned to face the window, looking out at the city rain. Relief. The word hung in the air, sharper than any insult. Relief? Elena repeated, her voice barely audible. For a split second, Julian said, still facing the window, I thought it was over. I thought you had actually found someone else. I thought, finally, I can stop trying. I can stop failing her. I can just be. He turned around to face her. I realized that I wasn't fighting to keep you anymore, Elena. I was fighting to survive you. Elena felt her knees give way. She sank onto the edge of the sofa, the silk of her dress pooling around her. She had wanted to ignite a fire to warm their house. She hadn't realized the house had already burned down, and Julian was just standing in the ashes, tired of the smoke. You don't mean that, she sobbed. We love each other. I do love you, Julian said. He sounded surprised by the fact. I love you enough to know that I can't be what you need. You need a storm, Elena. You need the highs and the lows to feel alive. I just want peace. And when I read that text, I realized I wanted peace more than I wanted this marriage. He walked over to her, but he didn't touch her. He looked down at her weeping form with a gentle, distant sorrow. The text didn't break us, he said quietly. It just showed me that we were already broken. He turned and walked toward the guest room. The sound of his footsteps retreating was steady, rhythmic, and final. He didn't slam the door this time. He just closed it. The phone rang at 2:43 a.m. It was a shrill, violent sound that pierced the heavy silence of the penthouse. Elena, who had been lying awake staring at the ceiling, snatched it from the nightstand before the second ring. A few seconds later, the door to the guest room opened. Julian stood there, silhouetted by the hallway light, wearing a t-shirt and boxers. He didn't look sleepy. He looked alert. Ready. Who is it? He asked, seeing the terror on her face. It's my mom, Elena choked out, clutching the phone to her chest. She fell. The neighbor found her. The ambulance is taking her to Northwestern. The wall between them, the invisible barrier of the guest room and the impending divorce, evaporated instantly. Julian didn't ask questions. He didn't mention the fight, the text, or the lawyer. He simply nodded, his face shifting into a familiar mask of competence. Get dressed, he said, his voice calm and authoritative. Wear something warm. I'll bring the car around. 20 minutes later, they were speeding down Lakeshore Drive. The city was empty, a skeleton of steel and concrete under the streetlights. Julian drove with one hand on the wheel, his focus absolute. He was in his element. Crisis management. He was the architect stabilizing a structure that was shaking. Elena sat in the passenger seat, shivering despite her coat. She watched his profile, the sharp jawline, the steady eyes. This was the Julian she had married, the man who could fix anything, the man who, when her father died, had handled the funeral, the estate, and her grief without breaking a sweat. She's going to be okay, Julian said, sensing her panic without looking at her. Northwestern has the best trauma unit. I've already texted Dr. Aris to let him know we're coming. You texted Aris? Elena asked. He owes me a favor, Julian said simply. At the hospital, Julian was a machine. He bypassed the confused resident at the desk, spoke directly to the charge nurse, and got them into a private waiting area. He filled out the insurance forms while holding Elena's hand, not romantically, but to stop it from shaking so she could sign her name. He got her coffee. Black, 2 sugars, exactly how she took it. Hours bled into one another. The diagnosis came at 5 o'clock a.m. A fractured hip, but no brain bleed. She would recover. When the doctor left, the adrenaline crashed. Elena slumped against the vinyl chair, exhaling a breath she felt she had been holding for 3 hours. She looked at Julian. He was standing by the vending machine, rubbing his eyes. His guard was down. He looked human. "Thank you," she whispered. Julian walked over and sat next to her. For the first time in a week, there was no distance. Their knees brushed. "You don't have to thank me, Elena. She's my mother-in-law. I care about her." Elena turned her body toward him. The harsh hospital lighting washed out the tension in his face, making him look younger. "You were amazing tonight. You took care of everything." "It's just logistics," he murmured, leaning his head back against the wall. "It's not just logistics," she insisted. She reached out and took his hand. He didn't pull away. His skin was warm. "It's us. We're good at this, Julian. When it matters, we work. We're a team." She squeezed his hand, desperate for him to squeeze back. She needed this night to mean something. She needed the trauma to be the glue that put the vase back together. "See?" she thought. "You can't leave. You're the only one who knows how to take care of me." Julian turned his head to look at her. His eyes were soft, filled with a complex emotion she read as tenderness. He didn't withdraw his hand. "We are a good team," he agreed quietly. "We always have been when there's a crisis." Elena's heart soared. He had said we. He hadn't corrected her. "Maybe," she started, her voice trembling with hope. "Maybe we just needed a reminder. Maybe we can get through the other stuff too. If we can handle this, we can handle a stupid text message, right?" Julian looked at her for a long moment. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. He just squeezed her hand. A brief, firm pressure, and then stood up. "Let's go home, Elena. You need to sleep. I'll drive." The ride back was different. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It felt companionable. Elena watched the sunrise bleeding pink and orange over the lake, and for the first time since Tuesday, she felt safe. She convinced herself that the worst was over. She thought the relief he had spoken of last night was just exhaustion, speaking. Tonight, he had shown up. Tonight, he had been her husband. She didn't see the way Julian gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. She didn't see the sadness in his eyes as he glanced at the city skyline. She didn't realize that for him, tonight hadn't been a renewal of their vows. It had been a final act of service. He had cleaned up the mess one last time, not because he was staying, but because he wanted to leave the house in order before he walked out the door. Elena woke up at noon. The heavy blackout curtains she had drawn after returning from the hospital were still pulled tight, sealing the room in an artificial twilight. She stretched, her body aching from the plastic hospital chair, but her mind light, buoyed by a fragile optimism. She remembered the way Julian had held her hand. She remembered the we. We are a good team. She threw off the covers, imagining the scene awaiting her. Julian in the kitchen, perhaps making lunch. the tension of the last week dissolved by the reality of a true life-or-death moment. She believed, with the desperate logic of the heartbroken, that the trauma had reset the clock. But when she opened the bedroom door, there was no smell of food. There was no hum of the espresso machine. There was only the sound of a zipper being pulled shut. A long, metallic zzz that cut through the apartment like a saw. Elena walked into the living room. Julian was there, standing by the front door. Beside him were 2 large suitcases and a garment bag. His briefcase was already on his shoulder. He wasn't in his crisis mode clothes anymore. He was back in his armor, a navy suit, crisp white shirt, polished Oxfords. Elena froze, clutching her silk robe tighter around her waist. The hope that had sustained her sleep evaporated, leaving a cold pit in her stomach. "What is this?" she asked, her voice small. Julian looked up. He didn't look guilty. He looked ready. "I'm heading out," he said. "The movers will come on Monday for the books and the desk. I've left a list of contacts for the house maintenance on the counter." "But," Elena stammered, gesturing vaguely toward the door, toward the memory of last night. "But last night, we were... Julian, you stayed. You helped me, you held my hand." "I know," Julian said. He took a step toward her, not to embrace her, but to speak clearly. "I stayed because your mother was hurt, Elena. I stayed because you were terrified and you needed help. I didn't stay because I changed my mind." "How can you separate the two?" Tears pricked her eyes, hot and fast. "If you can care for me like that, if you can be that man, how can you just walk out?" "Because that's not a marriage, Elena. That's crisis management," Julian replied, his voice steady, devoid of malice but terrifyingly logical. "We function perfectly when the world is burning down. But I can't live in a fire just to make us work. I can't wait for the next catastrophe, or the next test, or the next ex-boyfriend scare just to feel close to you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his key ring. He detached the silver fob that accessed the penthouse elevator and the front door. He placed the keys on the marble console table. The clink was soft, final. "You wanted a reaction," Julian said, looking at her one last time. "You wanted to know if I would fight for you. You thought that if I didn't fight, it meant I didn't care." "I just wanted to know you loved me," she whispered. "I did love you," Julian said. "I loved you enough to build this life for you, oh. But you were so busy testing the foundation to see if it would crack, you forgot to actually live in the house." He picked up the handles of his suitcases. "Julian, please," she begged, taking a step forward. "I won't do it again. I swear. No more games. Just stay." "It's too late for that," he said. "The blueprint is already drawn." He turned and opened the heavy oak door. The hallway outside was bright, indifferent. He walked out, the wheels of his suitcases gliding silently over the floor. "Goodbye, Elena." The door closed. Elena stood alone in the center of the sprawling, $1,000,000 living room. It was perfectly silent, perfectly still. The city view outside was magnificent and cold. She looked at her phone on the table. It was black and silent. No notifications, no texts to wait for, no games to play. She had won her answer. She had wanted to know if there was a limit to what he would endure, if there was a point where he would stop being the stoic, unshakable statue and finally move. She had found it. He had moved. he had moved on. Elena sank to the floor, surrounded by the perfect empty space, and for the first time, she understood the difference between silence and peace. One was a comfort, the other was a sentence, and now she had to live in it.